The first blow landed so suddenly that the diner seemed to gasp with him, a sharp intake of breath rippling through the bright midday room as an old man's head snapped to the side and his glasses skidded across the table. The word, "Shut up," hung in the air like a slap itself, loud enough to silence clinking forks and freeze conversations. In that instant, no one noticed the woman stepping through the glass doors, sunlight haloing her shoulders, just as no one noticed the small, worn metal pin beneath the old man's cardigan or the quiet dignity in his eyes that had once stared down far worse than a bully's rage. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and standing up for those who can't always stand up for themselves, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel and stories. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that need them most. The diner was a familiar place to Harold Whitcomb, a corner booth he chose every Tuesday just after noon, when the sunlight poured in through the windows and warmed the red vinyl seats. It was part of his routine since his wife passed, a small anchor in days that sometimes felt too long. Harold was 81, his hands spotted and trembling slightly as he lifted his coffee, his posture bent but not broken. Beneath the soft cardigan and neatly pressed shirt was a spine that had carried a country's weight once, marching through mud and fear, standing watch when freedom felt fragile. But those days were quiet memories now, folded away like the flag that rested in a cedar box at home. Across from him sat no one, but that didn't bother Harold. He liked watching people, the way families leaned together, the way couples laughed over shared plates, the way sunlight danced on chrome and glass. It reminded him that life kept moving, that there was still warmth in the world. What he didn't expect was the man who stormed in moments later, anger radiating off him like heat from asphalt. The bully's name was Trent Calloway, though no one in the diner knew it then. They only knew his presence filled the room too loudly, his voice sharp, his movements careless. He bumped into tables, cursed under his breath, and when his path was blocked by Harold's chair as the old man carefully stood to adjust it, Trent snapped. He saw only a frail obstacle, not a life lived in service, not the decades of sacrifice etched into wrinkles. His frustration boiled over, and his hand lashed out. The strike wasn't meant to injure badly, just to intimidate, to remind the world who held power in that moment. But to Harold, it echoed with memories he'd tried to bury, sudden violence, the shock of it, the way time slows when you realize someone sees you as less than human. He tasted copper, steadied himself against the table, and felt the room's eyes on him, some wide with horror, others darting away in fear of becoming the next target. The manager froze behind the counter, torn between stepping in and staying safe. A young mother pulled her child closer. Someone whispered that they should call the police. But the seconds stretched, heavy and helpless, as Trent leaned in, face twisted with contempt, his words spilling out like venom. He didn't know Harold's name. He didn't know the weight of the metals hidden beneath soft fabric. He only saw an old man he could dominate. At that very moment, the woman who had just entered the diner stopped short. Her name was Mara Whitcomb, and the sight before her hit like a punch to the chest. She had come straight from a long morning of briefings, her blazer still creased from hours in a secure conference room, her mind full of threats and strategies meant to keep millions safe. But none of that mattered when she saw her father, her strong, gentle father, being humiliated and hurt in a place that had always been his small refuge. Mara's life had been built on responsibility. Raised on stories of duty and sacrifice, she had followed a path that demanded resilience and clarity under pressure. As the head of Homeland Security, she was used to walking into tense situations, used to eyes turning toward her for answers. Yet nothing had prepared her for the raw fear that surged when she saw Harold's hand shaking as he reached for his fallen glasses, or the way his shoulders hunched not just from age, but from shame. She moved without thinking, her heels striking the tiled floor, her presence cutting through the frozen air. People noticed her then, the way she carried herself, the authority in her stride, the controlled intensity in her gaze. Trent noticed too, but he misread it, assuming she was just another bystander about to plead or protest. He turned, annoyance flaring, ready to bark another insult. What he saw instead was a woman who had faced down storms far greater than him, whose calm was not weakness but steel. She placed herself between him and her father, her body a shield, her eyes never leaving his face. The diner seemed to breathe again, tension shifting, something changing in the air. Mara helped Harold back into his seat, her touch gentle, her voice low and steady as she checked him for injuries. To anyone watching, it was a daughter caring for her father, a simple, human moment. But beneath it was a fury held in check, a promise that this would not end with silence or fear. Trent scoffed, words tumbling out, dismissive, cruel, confident in his anonymity. He had no idea who he was confronting, no sense that the woman standing before him was responsible for safeguarding borders, responding to disasters, and coordinating the protection of a nation. To him, power was loud and physical. He didn't recognize the quieter, deeper authority that comes from service and accountability. Mara straightened, her expression unchanged, and asked the manager to call the police, her tone leaving no room for argument. She then addressed the room, reminding everyone that violence was never acceptable, that respect wasn't optional, that standing by in silence only fed cruelty. Her words weren't shouted, but they carried, resonating with something people had felt but hadn't known how to say. As sirens grew closer in the distance, Trent's bravado faltered. He shifted, suddenly aware of eyes on him not with fear, but with judgment. The old veteran he had struck was no longer alone, and the room was no longer his stage. When officers arrived, the story unfolded quickly, witnesses speaking up now, courage blooming where there had been hesitation. The handcuffs clicking around Trent's wrists were not a spectacle of revenge, but a quiet restoration of order. Harold sat silently through it all, holding Mara's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He didn't need apologies or grand gestures. What mattered was that someone had stood up, that the values he had once fought for were alive in his daughter and, perhaps, rekindled in the hearts of those who watched. In the days that followed, the story spread, not because of Mara's title, which she kept out of the spotlight, but because of the image of an old man and his daughter, dignity meeting cruelty and refusing to bow. People talked about the veteran who endured, about the woman who stepped in, about the reminder that strength wears many faces. For Harold, the diner slowly became a place of healing again. Strangers nodded with respect, some stopping to thank him for his service once they learned who he was. He listened, humbled, always quick to say he was just one of many. But, inside, something had shifted. The fear that had flickered in him that day faded, replaced by a quiet pride not in what he had done long ago, but in what his daughter continued to do every day. Mara returned to her demanding work, carrying the incident with her as a reminder of why it mattered. Policies and plans were important, but so were small moments of courage, the choice to protect, to intervene, to care. She knew she couldn't be everywhere, but she hoped the story would inspire others to step forward when they saw injustice, to remember that silence can wound as deeply as a raised hand. Near the end of this story, if it's touching something in you, if it's reminding you of someone you love or a moment you wish you'd acted differently, please take a second to like the video, share it, and let us know in the comments. Your engagement helps these stories keep reaching people who need them. And before this story ends, we have a special request. Comment below with the words, "Respect has no age," if you believe every person deserves dignity, no matter how old, quiet, or overlooked they may seem. The diner still fills with sunlight every Tuesday at noon. Life goes on, ordinary and fragile, waiting for moments that reveal who we really are. Sometimes those moments come as cruelty, sudden and sharp. Sometimes they come as courage, stepping through a door at just the right time. And sometimes, they remind us that behind every wrinkled hand is a history, behind every calm gaze a strength, and behind every act of kindness a chance to make the world feel a little safer, a little more human.